I want to be honest because I'm about to bash Materialists. However, while watching this movie, I didn't hate it. I enjoyed it enough for what it was, even though I thought it was a fairly big disappointment for me. The more I've thought about this movie in the past few days, the more I've come to dislike this movie and have some just absolute hatred for aspects within this movie. And I just have to say, like, Materialists is a movie that I think has very little profundity within it, yet clearly believes it is profound. And I think that's one of the issues with this movie that I noticed while watching Materialists. And before we dive into what this movie is about, I want to talk about the thematic weight and ideas at play within Materialists so you can have them in mind when I go into the plot points within this movie, because thematically Materialist is trying to achieve a lot. This is from director Celine Song, who brought us Past Lives a few years ago, a movie that I thought was delightful. And this movie is now riffing on Jane Austen specifically. There are ideas of love and marriage within this story. There is ideas of class. There is ideas of individual growth. And Celine Song is exploring the relationship of love intertwined with economics. So while watching Materialists, I was expecting a movie that asks what one wants to be happy and then what one expects to have in life, which is kind of the main idea that the Lucy character played by Dakota Johnson is kind of chasing in this movie and asking herself. There is this war going on within the movie, which is marrying for love versus marrying for transactional benefits. And this film is very aware of the history and customs of marriage. And I thought that was an interesting structure to put it on, which is framing marriage as this business transactional, really taking the romance out of it. And I will just say this is also where the movie starts to lose me, because thematically that's a great idea, but presentation-wise, I just don't think Materialist has that. There is this idea that is at the forefront of Materialist, which is the ability for somebody to rise in hierarchy of class through marriage. And that is what I was interested in and seeing what this movie plays with. And sometimes Celine Song gets it, and then other times I just thought this movie was woefully inept at committing to that idea. And the story, which I have written down here, follows Lucy, played by Dakota Johnson, a matchmaker in New York who finds herself at the center of a love triangle between a charming millionaire played by Pedro Pascal, his character's name is Harry, and a failing stage actor moonlighting as a caterer who also happens to be Lucy's ex. This is John, played by Chris Evans. And essentially this movie is Lucy must go on a journey of self-discovery and determine if the luxury lifestyle she's always dreamed of having is in conflict with her pursuit of romantic chemistry that she has with John, despite his poorness. And this movie just isn't very clever on this idea. This is a movie that is, an archetype of stories we've seen: rich versus poor, choosing love over choosing comfort, all of that. Like, these are common themes within stories like this. And I think that you can play with this and have something interesting to tell in the 21st century. And again, Celine Song is a talented writer, and I think there are scenes within this movie that are well written and explore this idea. It's just kind of far and few between, and a lot of the story beats within it kind of betray this story being told. This movie is very silly and on the nose in a way just I wasn't necessarily expecting with Celine Song, given her past performance with Past Life. The first scene of this movie, which I just think is abysmal, and where I watched it and I was like, really, this is what this movie is going for. We see like the first people on Earth, the cave people, getting into this relationship and like being wed. And it paints it very clearly as transactional. So basically to say that our earliest history, romance is intertwined with the economics of it all. And Lucy, the character played by Dakota Johnson, is very matter of fact about this. She has spreadsheets, she has stats, she has mathematics on her side. Basically, the math of love is here. And this character is very direct about that and her feelings about love, and how matchmaking is essentially just a game of stats where you come from different financial backgrounds. You have this relationship with your parents. You come from this neighborhood. You have this level of education. You have this level of political beliefs that match. it ultimately just becomes a game of numbers. And if you have enough of a societal background that is similar, it's probably going to end up being a good match. Her understanding of romance and the world gets flipped in this movie in a way that isn't quantifiable. Essentially, there are variables at play of chaos that shatter her perceptions of what one wants in life from love. This variable that I talk about, which is a light spoiler, is introduced in the second act of this story. And there is a sexual assault subplot, which becomes the variable that kind of begins the change within the Lucy character. And it follows essentially a client of Lucy's, played by Zoe Winters, going on a bad date that Lucy set up. Frankly, it's one of the stupidest written subplots in a movie that I've seen in a while. I think it's so misguided. I just couldn't believe what was happening, and it just didn't really make sense within the confines of this movie. For the first half of the movie, Lucy is a working woman for a matchmaking company whose worldview on dating is suddenly shattered in her 30s when a man sexually assaults one of her clients. And my issue with this is she's been in this world. She apparently understands dating better than anyone else. She's able to process all of this. And like, she doesn't account for the variable that some men are just pieces of shit. That never crossed her mind, and it like kind of shatters her mind that something like this would happen to a client, or that this is a risk, or that she didn't account for any of this. And like, you know, she's working with extremely rich clientele. One, not only would her being a woman in New York and just being a woman in general give her a better perspective on this and like a better understanding of like the dangers of dating, but two, the fact that apparently she's just never had to think about this up until this point in her life, despite her profession. Just the more you think about it, the more it just doesn't make sense. And this is the catalyst for her character redemption. And when she realizes that maybe she should start choosing love and not think of love as numbers and background and societal status. And I want to now just spend some time talking about the Dakota Johnson performance in this movie, which is divisive at best. I like her as a screen presence, and I specifically like her off screen. I love when she does interviews. I think she is so dry, witty. Just, I really love the persona and character that Dakota Johnson has built as a celebrity. In film, it's very specific and has to be utilized well. I think very few films have actually utilized Dakota Johnson well. I think Cha Cha Real Smooth from 2022 is a film that utilizes her well. Peanut Butter Falcon, The Bigger Splash, Social Network, like all of those are films that understand how to use Dakota Johnson. And then when she's in a film like this, I was hoping that Celine Song would be able to get it out of her. And I think Celine Song, to her credit, understands in part what makes Dakota Johnson such a unique screen presence. And at other times, just like is unable to tap into anything that makes Dakota Johnson good, which is also a difficulty because I actually think this role was kind of tailor-made for Dakota Johnson. You look at the personality of Lucy, dry, matter of fact, and like the thing that I kept thinking about with this character, which I think is very intentional, is like you are not supposed to necessarily root for the Lucy character. You should find her deeply unpleasant at times. And she says and holds beliefs in this movie that make it easy for the audience to hate her. Specifically, this fight that she has with the Chris Evans character in a crowded street on New York City is like a moment that you're supposed to really just kind of dislike this character and who they are. And again, I kind of think Dakota Johnson should kind of be a perfect fit for this, and like the anti-chemistry that she doesn't have with Pedro Pascal, the fact that like there's not a huge romantic chemistry that those two characters has, should work for what this movie is about. And ultimately, it just doesn't. And I don't think Dakota Johnson gives a particularly good performance in this movie. I liked her probably more than most do in this movie, but it's just, there is something flat about this character. And she delivers lines in a way that just feel non-human at times. And that's also kind of an issue with these characters within Materialist is specifically this character of Lucy just doesn't feel real. It is like almost a fantasy. Like she is seemingly living a very nice life on 80K a year in New York City, which just isn't realistic. She doesn't understand dating, apparently, based on everything that I just talked about. And again, this is going to be another spoiler, so tune out for a few minutes. But ultimately, her final decision of this movie, who she chooses, which is the Chris Evans character, this relationship just will never work based on who Lucy is. And I don't think they do enough development to get you to the point that would work, which again can be an interesting idea within this movie, which I kind of thought that's what the movie was going to be. I kind of kept thinking it was going to have this eternal sunshine of the spotless mind thing, where these two characters end up committing to each other despite all of the history. And you all kind of know like this won't end well, but that's the point of that. That's kind of what I thought Materialist was going to be, but ultimately it's not. It just does kind of feel like it gives her the standard romance film, her happily ever after. It's also just kind of an issue with, I don't think Materialist ever really decides on a tone. It's all over the map. It's not a rom-com, and at times it feels like a parody of rom-com, but it's very much directly in lineage of rom-com films. But it's also like just not incredibly funny, and I don't think it ever really tries to go for jokes. So ultimately, I might classify this movie more as a romantic drama. However, if again it is trying to subvert those expectations, I don't think it does that very well. And this is also a movie that is a love triangle. Think broadcast news, think even her past film, Past Lives. And ultimately, it's also just not that. It's not really about a love triangle. The Pedro Pascal character leaves this movie at probably about the halfway point of this movie. Like there's no real tension in this love triangle. Ultimately, she's with one guy and then she goes to be with the other guy. It's just a hodgepodge throughout. Specifically of tone, where the message of the movie, as I guess as I wrote it, is dating should be for love, but in 21st century America, it's so consumer driven, where the 99% climb to achieve status via our connection to the 1% that we forget what love actually is. I think that's what this movie is trying to be. I just don't think it is succeeding at doing that. I also think some of the reasons this movie fails is the decision that Lucy makes, which is kind of the crucial idea of this movie, which is she clearly makes the wrong decision in this movie. And it's kind of the issue of having Pedro Pascal in this role. You would choose this character Pedro Pascal plays a million times out of a million. He's extremely charismatic in this movie. He's rich. He's handsome. He's thoughtful. He's kind. He's funny. He's gentle. He's patient. He's an understanding partner. And you really just like, he doesn't really have flaws, which there is a flaw revealed that is a very funny reveal within Materialist that I'm not going to spoil. But ultimately, he is a very kind of like perfect boyfriend and partner. And then juxtapose that with the Chris Evans character, who's a 40-year-old something failing theater actor in New York who seemingly has no real ambition, has a shitty apartment, has terrible roommates, and makes awful financial decisions. Like he is somebody that drives a car in New York City despite not being able to afford to drive a car / live in New York City. And the reason this movie at all really works is because you do end up buying the Chris Evans performance, who I think is quite good in this movie and is able to elevate really a nothing character. And so he's able to really just bring a level of charisma to this movie that you feel sympathetic. He has those puppy dog eyes that Chris Evans can tap into very well, where you do feel like he is the everyday, and he also plays a loser very well at times. I ultimately think the struggle with Materialists, and where I'm kind of talking about this movie like betraying what it's really about, and where I thought about it more the more I disliked it, Lucy's character is not developed enough to choose the Evans character and have her happily ever after, as this movie seemingly presents her to have. It's also the issue where Chris Evans just doesn't really read as poor on screen. He can be a bit of a loser in films. I think he's actually quite good at tapping into that, but he's just too handsome to be where he is at this stage of life in this movie, and I just don't think that necessarily works. And I'm not saying that poor people can't be handsome. He just reads successful, like he would be a bigger deal. He's too much of that movie star that we see, and it just doesn't really go away in that movie. I wonder if you switch the Pedro Pascal and Chris Evans characters, like where you had Pedro Pascal playing the failed theater actor, and now you have Pascal, 50-year-old failing theater actor, little bit more schlubby, maybe a little bit more heavy set, a little bit more worn down in life, and you have Evans as this multimillionaire. I think that's where you could start getting into it and thinking like, oh, maybe this works and this makes more sense. And like, if she does ends up choosing this character, it does feel for more love and more chemistry and all that. I'm kind of like spitballing here, but ultimately it is just a case of every decision that this movie makes just kind of feels illogical, doesn't really feel like it goes towards anything. I think is trying to be profound, but is deeply formulaic, and ultimately just some of the subplots that I mentioned, the catalyst for Lucy's character development doesn't really work. So there are fine things to recommend in this movie. I think this movie has good writing in it. I think there are monologues that are well. I think there are scenes that are really biting. There is this moment where the Lucy character played by Dakota Johnson is basically telling a client of hers, be honest with me, you can tell me anything and it won't shock me. And this client kind of reveals why she's getting married. And I think that's actually really good writing there in that scene of just like, oh, cutting through the BS of romance, this is why this person is choosing love. And I get that. And I like those scenes in there. And I think there are strong things to recommend in this movie. But ultimately, by the end of this movie, I really just don't think this movie has anything cohesive to stand on. Again, as an experience watching this movie, I didn't necessarily hate it, but as a movie that is developed and well written and honestly like makes sense, I just don't think Materialists is able to achieve any of this. This is going to be a pretty negative review for me. I am giving Materialists 2 out of 5 stars. So thank you to everyone who watched this video. I hope you enjoy and you consider subscribing. I'll have reviews for F1 coming out soon, Superman coming out soon. So make sure you subscribe to this channel for more.